Hello and welcome to the AA Ireland podcast and the final episode of this series. I'm Paddy Comyn.
And I'm Anna Collin.
Have you ever considered buying a classic car? Well, in this episode, we speak to expert David Golding of David Golding Classic Cars about buying and running a classic car.
AA membership comes with lots of great benefits. Breakdown service 365 days a year, so you'll never be left stranded. Roadside rescue, we won't just tow your car, we fix 8 out of 10 at the roadside. Our personal cover means you're covered in any car, even when you're not the driver. Home start, cover when you're at home. Perfect if your car has been lying idle for a while. To find out more, go to the aa.ie.
So this week on the AA Ireland podcast, we're talking all things classic cars, and I'm delighted to be in the showroom of David Golding Classic Cars. And David, we're surrounded by some fabulous cars here. First of all, thank you for joining us, and secondly, tell us, how you got into this world.
Thank you for having me, Paddy. Well, I started in business in 1988, but I suppose I grew up from a very young age, always interested in cars. I think I knew all the makes of cars when I was about 3 years of age, back in the 60s. And it developed from there. I suppose I was fated to end up doing what I'm doing, and I'm enjoying it more and more as time passes on.
So when did David Golding Cars start up? How long are you in business?
I opened originally in 1988, and I had a little place down in Ranelagh, and selling very much the same cars as I'm selling today, except they wouldn't have been classics back then. I mean, the MGBs and whatever that were, second-hand cars at the time.
So look, obviously, we're here to talk about classic cars, and we are assuming nothing here. For people who kind of have the notion, I wouldn't mind getting an old car, wouldn't mind getting a classic car, where do you start?
Well, it's really something you want. I mean, obviously, there's factors that determine the affordability of running a classic car. For example, when a car reaches 30 years old, it qualifies for the €56 road tax, which can be a very big thing for people. Obviously, if you have a large engine Mercedes that's not 30 years old, it can be costing you up to $2,500 in road tax. Though once the magic age hits in, it's down to €56. So that's a big factor. Other factors are the insurance. Classic insurance cuts in at 20 years old, so that allows people to have a second car to use occasionally for unlimited mileage.
I must say that's something I didn't know about. 20 years old, actually. That's so the car doesn't have to be. People probably assume that it has to be 30 years old for everything. Obviously, for the cheaper
exactly,
tax, but not for the insurance.
I mean, I say the definition of classic car is very much open to debate, but the factors that from a business point of view is obviously once it reaches 0, 2 or older, it qualifies for the classic insurance, which is a big factor for somebody who wants a second car. Otherwise, you're going to end up paying a full new insurance premium. You have no bonus to carry over on a private policy, so that can be expensive. So once the classic insurance cuts in, it opens the doors for 0, 2 or older. And say the classic tax is, at the moment, it's 92 and older, €56. And the third factor is they become NCT exempt at 40 years and older. Now, again, personally, I recommend people do their NCT even after the 40 years. I mean, for £55, you get your car fully professionally tested, and at least you know where you stand with it.
So when you say you don't have to do it, will you not get notifications after it's 40 years?
No, once it's 40 years, it's exempt. It reaches. Now, there are people, I believe this the oldest car, I think it's probably featured on your website at some stage, was it 1910 or something, going in for an NCT? I mean, there's still people want their cars tested and want to have the certificate, and it's a good way of keeping.
Well, it is a good idea to it's a good way of getting your car checked over.
Exactly, yeah, and especially now. I mean, the biggest dangers of classic cars are really fuel related at the moment. With the ethanol and the petrol is attacking the older rubber hoses that didn't meet the standards that are required today, and people park their cars up all winter, little knowing that their rubber is rotting away. And I've heard of a DB6 going on fire in the last few weeks, destroyed, no insurance, so it can be very, very expensive.
Just as a slight diversion, what's your view on this E10 petrol?
It's only going to make matters worse. I mean, that's going to affect fuel injection systems as well, I think.
Because it wasn't something that was necessarily on my radar, but suddenly there's been a lot of discussion about E10 and the fact that it's going to be quite widespread and brought in. So what does it do to older cars?
It seems to be causing problems in England on a much wider scale than here. The E10 is even more corrosive on rubber than the E5. So I believe there's additives that you can put into it that neutralise the effect, and but just people need to be aware of the dangers, because it is a real danger at the moment of your car going up in fire.
So look, obviously there's a variety of cars in front of me here. I'm looking at a Lotus Elan, I'm looking at a Citroen DS, lovely Volvo Estate, something I particularly like myself. I know it's just kind of how long is a piece of string, but if you were, advising a relative or a close friend about getting into classic cars, where would you tell them to start?
It has to be something you personally want. I mean, okay, look, different people have different motives for buying a car. It's a very good place to park money if that's what you want to do. And you have a large large sum of cash. Classic car, a great place to park it. If you're a private individual, you can buy and sell them, and there's no capital gains tax involved. So there's a lot of people in this country who have some extraordinarily expensive cars. Some of the most expensive in the world can be found here, running into tens of millions of quid, and that's one end of the market. So that you'd be looking at a car that's going to make you a few quid along the way. Otherwise, the most popular cars in this country at the moment are probably Toyotas. Old Starlets, Coronas, Corollas, stuff like that. Huge interest in them.
Obviously the Mazda MX-5 recently.
The MX-5s are taking off a bit as well, but the most popular car I've had on my Facebook page, believe it or not, has been a rear-wheel drive Toyota Starlet that achieved something like 110,000 views in a couple of days, which...
What is it about Ireland and those old Toyotas?
We're a very individual market here, and I think especially even outside Dublin, it's even more sort of localised. People here, it's cars of the people here that have the widespread appeal. So in the past it would have been Volkswagen Beetles, then the Ford Escort Mark 1s and Mark 2s would have got the greatest interest, and now it's Toyota Starlet or Corolla or Corina. It's just incredible
which would have been cars that for
people's family had.
Yeah, they were everywhere.
This is the thing. People spent their childhood in the back seat of one, touring around the country or whatever. When they got older,
with no air conditioning.
Yeah. And then when they got older, it would have been their first car. And it's like, and they would have been the most popular cars back in a certain time. So that's what appeals to a lot of people. Other people want to get cars they could never normally afford. I mean, I'm looking here at a 300 SL 24 valve Mercedes 1990. I'm not sure how much that one was new, but a 500 version of that in 1990 was 104,000 punts. It was dearer than a 4-bedroom house. And now you can buy these at a fraction of that cost and have the cheap running costs. So, they're a very, very good seller for that reason, that there's sort of a very, mid-price car that's very, very usable, hop into and tour the country in, power steering, automatic. So they're a very, very, very good seller. Other people, Porsches would be very popular of all models.
It's a 911 that's actually behind you as well.
A couple of 911s here. It's a 911 under the cover there in the corner, 73 one. So it's really down to personal choice. So I suppose the main factor is then a car that had some emotional connection to you in your youth, or childhood, or some family member had. I'm always very fondly reminisce about my grandfather's cars, and to this day I recently he always drove a Wolseley, and I recently purchased a Wolseley probably just for that very reason, that he'd had a similar car back in the 60s.
Do you find that from your customers, what percentage of them are buying for emotive reasons rather than anything else?
It's very hard to break it down.
There must be a big factor, though.
Then the other sort of category is a collector as such. People who have to have a car and would have maybe several and want another one, and they sort of want, they'd have a series of models. So they're looking for something, really good condition at a good price. But I suppose people's first car generally when they're starting the classic world is something they have some sort of emotive attachment to. And as the age profile of people are getting higher, like I've a Dublin registered Morris Minor out there, again, something I'd be very, familiar with growing up. It would have been a very popular car in Dublin, obviously, in the late 60s, early 70s. And in fact, that car was built in Rathmines in the Britain's factory near the bridge there. Which, was reason for me, I have to have it. All the cars I probably buy for myself first and foremost. And
So do you tend to sell what you like yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some makes and models. I'm not a Ford man at all. You'd never see a Ford down here. People think I'm mad, when I turn them down. But I never had any affinity to Fords. And, I've had the odd Anglia or two, but that's purely because I like the old 60s cars. So basically what I sell is what I like. And I always feel that if something for some reason doesn't sell, I can use it myself. Obviously I can only drive one at a time, but I'd enjoy driving every single car I'd have in stock at the moment. And
What are your own personal favourites in terms of cars?
I love big engines, the bigger the better. I love 12-cylinder cars, E-Type Jags, XJSs, anything that kills the atmosphere.
Has a bit of grunt and a bit of muscle.
Yeah. I love engineering, but I love the older cars as well. I love cars in the 20s and 30s. I'm fascinated by the early engineering that was, developing as people were driving back in the heyday of motoring back in 100 years ago.
And obviously, there is the 30-year rule, and that helps, of course. But there's that period, and as an aside, I kind of wonder: are we likely to lose some future classics now because of the way road tax is? I'm thinking things like Lexus, etc., which are interesting cars, big engines, but are possibly dying out because their tax is too big now.
Well, it's amazing to see, because obviously, once cars got to a certain age, the road tax was probably costing more than the car's value. I mean, I've a couple of big engines, more modern cars up in my other yard, like a CL 420 Mercedes 97. And the fact that car is still around and someone has kept it, was probably declared off the road for 6 or 7 years. But up to then, somebody was paying the road tax on it every year, keeping it maintained, resulting in a car that's, still in really good condition, which would be exceptional for a 90s car, because most of them would have been scrapped purely because the road tax got too high, and the values have only started to go back up again now. So it's not really the road tax, I think, that's going to determine the future and what cars are going to be classic, if you like. I think the technology is very much to the fore. I mean, even now we're looking at 10-year-old hybrid cars that are giving problems. I can't see a hybrid or an electric car
being a
classic. I just think, to me personally, the character's gone when the engine's gone.
I was going to ask, in relation to this new trend of putting electric powertrains into classic cars, how do you feel about that?
I was just having that discussion with someone this morning. I just cannot understand somebody who'll pay hundreds of thousands of quid to get an electric unit put into an E-Type Jag. Like, why?
Yeah, I mean, look, I suppose they would argue, look, they can use it as an everyday, that it's going to work and it doesn't cost them much money, but to run.
I just can't see it. I just can't see. And to me, once cars have gone electric, they've become like a fridge. They're just another appliance and a mode of transport from A to B. I mean, even driving the modern cars today, the driving has gone out of them. Your adaptive cruise control and your lane assisted steering the wheel for you. You can literally close your eyes and you're getting from A to B in comfort, but it's not motoring. It's not as we knew it.
So obviously, someone getting these, a lot of the customers who come to you will use these as extra cars, have them at weekends, etc. Are there cars that you could practically use every day?
The issue is determined by the insurance. It's almost impossible to get a standalone classic car policy for a car. An older car, if you don't have a modern equivalent. That's the main criteria for the classic insurance. So if you don't have a modern car, you won't get covered. That's something that probably happened about 10 years ago. There were a lot of people buying old 123 Mercedes and, using them every day. They were exempt from NCT, literally driving them into the ground, and it was their daily driver and the €56 road tax. And they were, obviously, they're polluting cars as well. So, yeah. So look, while it'd be nice to have an everyday, I really can't see it. I mean, the likes of the 129 Mercedes range, the 2-seater convertibles, they're eminently suitable for use every day. They've hard tops, soft tops. But again, it wouldn't be as fuel efficient as a modern car. It might be a factor for people.
But in a 2-car family, and you have your new family 7-seater, and the second car is a Volvo Estate that I'm looking at here, would that be a car you could use every day?
It would certainly be very practical. I mean, there are people, not a lot of people, but there are people who would keep a car in their holiday home for when they're in their holiday home, and that would be something like a Volvo Estate. It would be useful for them while they're in the wilds of Connemara or wherever. So that's another category of buyer.
But there seems to be practical reasons why you can't.
There's a very, very small minority of people who want to use their classic every day. I mean, most people, a lot of people buy them and they treasure them and cherish them and everything else. And using a car every day, it's very hard to. When you're parking in shopping centres and people are rolling trolleys into them and everything like that, it's if you have a nice car, it would be very hard to keep it in brilliant condition if you're using it as a daily driver in all weathers. So
talk to me a little bit about the maintenance and upkeep. So if you buy your reasonably, obviously cars coming out from you are in good condition already. They've been serviced, etc. What can someone expect in terms of upkeep?
Look, it's always buy the very best you can afford, because there's no such thing as a bargain classic car. If they haven't been maintained, you're going to end up with big bills. Cars coming out of England, I've a Porsche 944 just arrived yesterday. There's 161,000 miles on a 1989 car, but it doesn't feel like it. It had one lady owner for the first 150-odd thousand of those miles and full service history. And I've had lots of 944s, they're a very good seller. This is by far one of the best drivers. Drove it down to the NCT in Arklow last night and it passed first time. I didn't even check it before I went because I was so confident it was going to pass. And so that's the key thing, because it came with a thick file. There's the file of the car over there and the handbook. So you can see the English people...
Is the car here, no?
The car's not actually here, no. It's just up at the Valleters now today. But that's a typical English car that comes with a history file like that. All the service stamps up to date in the book. Even though the car is over 30 years old, they kept bringing it in for service and keeping all the invoices. And you're getting a good car when you get something like that. On the other hand, you get an Irish car. The Citroen DS, we'll talk about that while you're here. This is a one family owned car. Dublin car, 1973. It's been owned by a father and son from day one.
So is that the original Irish reg?
That's the original Irish reg. Very, very unusual. And it's a DS23, just incidentally, which would have been very rare in its day because that would have fallen into the higher motor tax category. Again, here we are talking about tax back in the 70s. So, but that car does not have an early history. They never kept the handbooks, never kept the invoices. Typical with an Irish car. People never left the book in to be stamped in the main dealers. It's just the mentality. We'd be very different to the British in that regard. I'm not saying the British cars are obviously much more prone to rust because they use salt on the roads where the Irish cars didn't. So, that's the main, if you're going to talk between Irish cars and UK cars, that would be the big difference. One would have the service history, the other would be a lot more solid.
Yeah, I had the experience myself. I bought an E30 BMW from the UK and I couldn't get over how well it had been maintained. The car was amazing, and all of the service history is just immaculate.
And here as well, I was looking at a car yesterday. I won't say what it was, but it was a very expensive Mercedes going back to the 50s, been fully restored here using top people, but not a single receipt. Because again, Irish mentality, let's get it done for cash. Save the 13.5% VAT. And again, you'll find that's very widespread, unfortunately, where when you go to sell that car, there's big gaps in it, English cars, they wouldn't, most English people would be old school English people anyway, totally upfront, want receipts for everything, happily pay their tax, keep the receipts, and resulting in a proper history file that somebody can see what was done to the car over the years. So, for me, that's very important to have the history file. I can lose a sale over a car not having a proper history. And I always tell people when they're trying to sell them to me or whatever, they look at me strange sometimes and say, but where's the paperwork? And they're saying, well, it's a really good car. I said, yeah, no, but I need the paperwork. And that's very important to me. So that's what I'd say to people as well. Get a car with full history that's been kept up to date. It will cost you more, but it pays in the long term. And
I know it's difficult for someone who makes a business from selling cars, but are there ever situations where you say to people, look, this isn't really the car for you?
I get people down. I had a family of 3 came to look at this 2-seater Mercedes the other week, and I didn't know there was going to be a child involved, but I knew as soon as they came down they were going to be not going to be buying. So I get told people down. I always say, well, they'd ring me up on the phone, will I fit in the car? I'll always say to them, come down. Older cars, much smaller. I don't know if people were smaller back in the older days, but a lot of the times people can genuinely not fit in a 60s sports car. So, but I always say to them, try it. It's not for me to tell them they can't fit.
I know it's difficult to choose favourites. It's like picking your favourite child. But do you have favourite classics that you like?
People ask me this question all the time. I love them all. If there's 4 wheels and noise,
but
and
you're
smell,
not a Ford guy,
or even 2 wheels. Well, as I said, I don't buy and sell Fords because I just don't have the grow. But I wouldn't, I'd still like it, appreciate an old. Yesterday or last week, a fella came up to me in an old 3-litre Granada, Mark 1 Granada, and my jaw just dropped. It was just incredible. Very rare car to have, and the condition of it, and again brings back memories. Remember, a friend's father had one back in the 70s, but possibly I might own something like that. But I never got the thing with the Mark II Escorts, and it's probably the same a bit like with the Starlets today. I just can't see how a Starlet's worth tens of thousands of quid, but people are paying them. So,
how is the classic car scene in Ireland? I mean, is it developed?
It's absolutely huge. I mean, I've been doing, the classics probably have become a large part of my business now for 10 years. And before that, I'd always have one or two. There'd be things I'd have myself and I'd sell them and replace them. But I mean, I've been keeping a stock of classics for 10 years. And in that time, the market has just mushroomed. It's really phenomenal. COVID was a major, major factor. My busiest 2 years were the COVID years because people were sitting at home with nothing to do. A lot of them probably had posters of cars on their walls when they were kids and they're sitting at home, bored stupid. Few quid coming in that they weren't able to spend, and a lot of them spent it on classic cars. So that's been a major boost to the business.
Well, which is great to hear.
And the show scene is phenomenal. I mean, there used to be a handful of shows, attended by the same old school people and the same cars, and now, like every Sunday and Saturday, a lot of Saturdays as well, evenings during the week, there's meetings and dozens of them all over the country. So
we've lost Terranure, which is
Terranure was a big blow. I know Tom Heavey started a new show in Galway last week, which I believe went really well, and it's a bit far for Dublin people to go for a day. But look, you just move on. There's so many different shows. Terranure was an old style show, becoming less popular because people had to, book in advance. If you're exhibiting, you're there all day. Crowds were humongous. The access in and out, obviously difficult when I think there was 13,000 or 1,300 cars at the last Terranure show. So it's a big day and a big commitment, especially if you come up from the country. And a huge organisation. You have to give hats off to the organisers because the organisation involved in that show was just phenomenal. The people are getting older. There's no new people coming in to take over. So The most popular shows now are the cars and coffee type events where you rock up to an empty car park somewhere and kick tires for half an hour and a half, whatever, have a coffee and go home. And there's no obligation to stay and it's totally informal.
I love going to those, but people who don't understand them think it's really odd. But it's a great
as I say,
thing.
There's different events for different people, and that's why these events are mushrooming because, there's still people like the old static shows. Other people like to go to runs where the cars are actually, they're driving their cars. There's displays of cheap cars. There's a show in Herbert Park a couple of weeks ago, really, really expensive cars. There was no shortage of £1 million or €1 million plus cars there. So it depends what your interest is. There's this one model only shows. There's Volkswagen shows up the north, huge attendances at them, Toyota events and stuff like that. So look, there's a show for everybody, whether you're just a viewer or a car owner. And there's people who spend every weekend going to different shows. That's their lifestyle. And then there's other people who have classic cars who wouldn't dream of going to a show. It's their own private, little toy, and they keep it to themselves. Nobody else knows they have it. And some people don't even drive them. They just sit and look at them and polish them. And
So look, obviously we need to talk about cost because, people who don't know the scene, don't know roughly how much you need to spend. If we were to kind of give me a guide about some different cars, what's an entry point, a safe entry point?
The first thing that's common to all cars, whether it costs you £1 million or it's costing you £1,000 is let's say the road tax. That's a key thing. So that's €56. Classic insurance can be €200 or less. So you can have a car sitting outside your house for a year for £256.
Right, so can you just give us an idea of the conditions with that?
So as I said earlier, the conditions for the insurance, the main thing is that you have an everyday driver.
But would there be mileage restrictions?
There's mileage restrictions. Now look, 3,000 kilometres, 5,000 kilometres, you pick and choose and pay accordingly. But, the vast majority of cars, especially people who have several cars, you can only drive one car at a time, which is why the insurance is so cheap. You can only drive one car at a time, and a lot of the cars wouldn't even do 1,000 kilometres a year. So
that's the
key thing to get out of the way. Okay, you've got the NCT every 2 years. That's a bonus. When a car gets to 30 years old, instead of being an annual NCT, it becomes biannual. So you get 2 years NCT for €55. Again, I can't stress how important it is to get your NCT done, because the likes of these fuel leaks, unless you've got a ramp yourself and you're checking, they can spot them for you and spot your rust. And cars can be dangerous if they're not maintained. People don't appreciate that. So they're your overheads for the year. After that, it's what your budget will allow you to. You can get a very nice car for £1,000. It mightn't be, just to get you up and running.
Could you really?
You'd route around. That's you could start getting something at that sort of value. It might be something fairly mundane to most people, but it could be something special for you.
But for someone with 5,000, they're doing
5,000. My range starts. I would never have anything really less than 10,000. And you'd be looking then at, Mercedes 190Es, stuff like that. They're obviously 30 years old, but the condition is key. You will get very bad condition versions of the cars I'm selling for a lot less money. I mean, people comment on my posts on Facebook, "God, that's mad dear," but you get what you pay for. And a lot of people, it's having the car. They're not really into the condition. They couldn't care less. They'd rather have a banger. I remember I had an old, like the red Mercedes down the end, the 107, the 280 SL. I bought one of those on eBay years ago while I was on holiday. Probably had a glass of wine or two too much. And when it was delivered back to the house, I opened the boot and there was no boot floor. It was so rotten. Now, it only cost me a couple of thousand, and I was happy just to stick it up in Dundeel and it was beyond restoration as far as I was concerned, so I stuck it up in Dundeel. I got my €2,000 back from a chap in Galway, and he was just delighted that he could get the car of his dreams. He'd seen it on Heart to Heart and Dallas and all these, programmes of the era where it was cult car, and he got one for £2,000.
Yeah, but how much did he spend on it?
Well, he was only going to drive around a local quarry or something. He wasn't bothered. It was the having it. He's somebody who wanted to have one. So again,
very
that's
large,
the difference.
dinky,
I mean, that particular one in top condition is 35,000. You won't get one for 2,000 today because, that was probably going back 10 years ago.
But of course, it's different if you're handy. And for people who don't know the spanners.
That's another reason why people buy them. I had a Ferrari Testarossa last year. The chap purely bought it because it needed repair. And he wasn't a mechanic, but he was a very, very skilled man, and he dropped the 12-cylinder engine out of it and rebuilt it himself. He was multilingual. He was able to call people all over Europe and get advice how to do it and source all the parts. And when he finished the car, he did 1 mile and handed me the keys and said, "It's for you to run in now and sell it for me, please." No interest in driving it. He just wanted to get involved in the engineering of a flat 12 Ferrari engine.
That's very interesting.
So that's another, and I come across people like that from time to time. Just want to work on them and have the kudos of, I built a Ferrari engine.
Well, it's quite an achievement.
So it is. It was a phenomenal achievement. It took him 10 years, but it's between getting the car, sourcing the parts, and I suppose building up a head of steam to get stuck into it.
But what I suppose I mean is that for some people, they don't want the bother. They want the classic car experience, but they haven't a notion what's going on underneath. So that's where spending a little bit more.
So that's where I'd suggest buy a car. Buy a car from a dealer, or at the very least, get it properly checked out. When I say get it checked out, you need somebody who knows what they're looking at. A modern mechanic would not have a clue about a 30-year-old car, a younger mechanic. So you need to get an old school person who'd worked on these cars in the past, knows their weak points or whatever. So that's important if you're buying privately. And then to know what, the car might have issues, but at least you know what they are, and then you can either, get stuck into them yourself or pay someone to fix them. But you don't want to buy a car online in England like a lot of people are doing, having it shipped over here, and the first time you actually sit in it is when it arrives in your door and you don't know what's hitting you. There's horror stories out there. The rust in England is horrendous. The big thing here is having an NCT test on the car. You've got to have. I won't sell a car without an NCT. I won't buy a car without an NCT because you don't know what you're getting into. A car can have all the English MOTs on paper in a bag with the car, but unless scrupulous people in England, the MOTs are done privately. Their local garage could be doing them. Heads get turned, brown paper bags change hands.
So finally, David, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Well, I've funny enough, things have changed over the last couple of years. The websites are still there, davidgoldingcars.ie. But the big thing now is social media, Facebook and Instagram. David Golding Cars page on both Facebook and Instagram. And I find a lot of the times now I put a picture of a car up on either Facebook or Instagram, and it's sold within a couple of hours. It doesn't even make the web page. Yeah. It's become a new phenomenon. I think social media has taken over. During COVID, obviously, with no car shows, a lot of people in the past, went to the likes of the NEC Classic Car Show, which is the big one in England every year. No intention of buying a car, see something, impulse buy, came home on it, and that was missing now since COVID. So Facebook in a way has taken over from that. You're not, if you specifically want a car, you get onto a website, you get onto Dundeel, you get onto CarZone, you get onto my own website and see what I have in stock and if I got what you're looking for. But that's only one category of buyer. So the new category of buyer are these impulse buyers. They're sitting having cup of coffee at home or at work or whatever.
Or the glass of wine.
Or the glass of wine, even better, the whiskey. Put on, flick through Facebook, see something, I want that. And there and then they've decided they want it. So it's taken over, the impulse buy, if you like, in a way from seeing something at a car show. And that's, for me, it's been absolutely fabulous the last couple of years.
And do you source cars for people, or is that not something
I not really get involved in. It's very messy I've stopped. I used to go to the UK 2-3 times a month pre-COVID and Brexit. Haven't been now since I think March 2020. Was that the beginning? I lost track of time. Beginning of COVID. So I wouldn't go and buy something for somebody unless I'd seen it, no matter how trustworthy the seller may be or whatever. If somebody else's money, I'd want to be there. So I don't really get involved in that. What I do though is I do a lot of commission sales for people now, and that's become a major part of my business, where I'll sell your car for you. It's an idea I've had for many years, and it's only taking off now. I mean, an estate agent buys and sells your house, but he doesn't actually buy it off you. And I always thought, why can't you, do that with a car? As I said, to the SL was 104,000. Why should I have to buy that in and sell it on? Actually own it. So now I try and avoid owning them if I can. I obviously have my own, probably 20 cars, but a lot of the dearer stuff I'm taking on a commission basis, and I happily sell them for people, again, providing they meet the condition criteria I'm looking for.
Well, David, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And thank you for giving us a beautiful tour of the workshop here. And now I definitely want to see that Volvo.
Thank you, Patrick.
Lots of food for thought on buying a classic there, Paddy. As always, you can read more on all things motoring on the AA Ireland blog, the aa.ie/blog. And you will, of course, find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook and TikTok. Please subscribe to the podcast, rate it if you like it. And until next time, goodbye and be safe.